Dr. Murray Cantor is a founding partner at Innovation Management Systems. Dr. Cantor has been a leader in the IT industry for over 30 years, applying leading-edge ideas in software and systems development. Dr. Cantor has recently retired from IBM, where he was a distinguished engineer, member of the Rational CTO Council, and a Rational lead for the analytics and optimization for software and systems. In that role, Dr. Cantor led the application of predictive analytics to software systems planning and development, as well as adapting lean techniques throughout the development lifecycle. Previously, Dr. Cantor was with Rational, where he served as the lead engineer for Rational Services and the developer of Rational Unified Process Extensions for Systems Engineering. Before joining Rational, he was a project lead at TASC, a defense and intelligence contractor. In that role, he applied object technology and early versions of the unified process to the successful delivery of highly complex systems for the United States Air Force Space Command. Dr. Cantor has published many professional articles, is the author of 2 books, Object-Oriented Project Management with UML and Software Leadership. We're excited to have Murray back with us again today, and now I turn it over to him.
Let me get set up here. Great. So hi, everyone. Thank you for coming back. And for those who are here for the first time, welcome. We have a lot to cover today, and hopefully you'll get a good feeling for what we're about. And for those who want to learn more and to delve deeper, please contact us, as Tom suggested. So as you recall from the last time, let me just actually jump ahead to this. We talked about the general notion of agility, and that agility is not just a set of software practices and the kind of Scrum and Kanban and the like, but it's a broader concept of a business being able to adapt, to adjust to, and adapt well to changes in its environment. And sometimes in order to become agile, you need to give up a certain amount of stability. That is a business design decision, whether you want to build a stable organization that's sort of impervious to changes around it, or you want to build an agile organization that quickly responds to changes around it. And we're going to talk about the techniques to do the latter, given that you've made the decision to become more agile. And so the example I love to give is that a jet fighter is a very agile platform, but not very stable. And in fact, a jet fighter will not be able to, if it loses its power, it won't be able to glide, and it requires very tight control loops in order to stay stable or able to stay flying. Whereas a jet airliner is a very stable platform. It doesn't adjust much, but wouldn't do very well in a dogfight. So today we're going to talk about 2 things, 2 key agile management practices. We're going to talk about how an organization can stay aligned while being agile through goal setting and measurement. We're going to give an introduction to the goal, question, metric methodology. And in particular, we're going to talk about setting measures to enable agility. And as you recall last time, we really talked about there were essentially 2 sources of change or needs to react. You can be working on uncertain things, and you need to react to what you've learned for new information. And particularly this is true if you're doing innovative work and you're building new systems. On the other hand, even if you're doing the same thing over and over again, as we've learned from lean manufacturing, that there still can be changes in flow. And particularly and the ability to react quickly to changes in flow. This is things in time, supply chain, and the like. And again, that's a kind of agility. So we have essentially 2 big dimensions: the uncertainty dimension and the amount of variation there is in things like product flow or even in product artifact. And in both cases, we need to set up measures that allow us to detect and react to those kinds of needs for being agile in our businesses. And in the first case, and the other thing is that the goals are often different. So if you're doing, if you're in a lean manufacturing situation, whether you have the same kind of product over and over again, but you have variations in flow, or whether you have a situation where you have repeated, you're building essentially the same, you're building the same kind of thing, but each one is different, say like in change requests or in DevOps and IT, the things that you mostly worry about is timeliness of response and productivity of the organization. If you're building new things and you're more of a project paradigm, what you're really worried about is meeting what we sometimes call the iron triangle goals of on time, on budget, and with the right content. And in both cases, in the second case, you're learning about that as you go, and you need to react to what you learn. In the first case, you're reacting to the changes of flow into your environment. We're going to talk about both situations in these talks, so we have lots to cover. Now, a key point is that measurements are essential for agility. That unlike what some people think, where an agile organization cannot be one that's measured, it's exactly the opposite. That in order to have agility, you need to have the ability to sense and respond to what's going on around you. You need tighter, not looser sense and respond loops. And if you think about an agile, any agile system, one that is responding to its environment, it's measuring its environment and it's reacting to it. Now, why people think some people might think that in fact measurements get in the way of being agility is because they have the wrong kinds of measurements. These measurements are not adherence to a practice, but actually measuring how your environment is changed around you and how you're reacting to it. And so putting in place the right kind of measures is absolutely essential. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how you do that. And the key idea here is to take some of the ideas that Buselli put together back in the 80s, actually, which is the goal question metric concept. And the idea is when you're setting up measures that actually help you drive your business in a more agile way, you have to ask the first question is, am I measuring just for the sake of measuring, or am I measuring in order to react to my situation and to achieve some sort of goal? And so you start out with the goal in mind. So if the goal is to become a more timely organization, response, and like suppose you're, again, in a DevOps situation, and the problem you have is that the time from problem identification to problem resolution is just too long, and you want to become more responsive, that's a goal. And then once you set those kinds of goals, or the goal might be, I want to be able to deliver more innovative things in a more reliable way, in a more predictive manner. That's a goal. Then once you have a goal, then you say, then the question you set up, what question would I answer to know whether I've achieved the goal? So in the first case, it might be, well, how long does it take me to get from here to there? How long does it take me from getting a problem identified to a problem resolved? And what you discover pretty quickly is there's no single number, but it's a range of numbers, and it has to be approached statistically. And so we're going to look at that. So the question might be more like, what does the distribution of times look like, and how would I measure and improve that? And then finally, what data would I need in order to answer the questions? And that clearly in that case, it would be, you would want to keep track of the timestamps from the time things were open to the time things were closed, would be an example. So we're going to talk about that as a part of setting up an agile organization. Now, what's interesting and really key to sort of alignment is that there's really different goals at different levels of the business. The line of business executive, they're worried about things like profit, return on investment. If it's a government agency, they have some sort of mission that they're trying to achieve, and they want to know whether they're achieving that. Often beneath them, they have a set of managers who are given a set of assets to to allocate. And having done that allocation, what they're supposed to deliver is value to the enterprise and efficiency to the enterprise. And of course, those are related. Below that, there's a set of project leads whose goal is to actually deliver, say, a product, and it could be other functional management like marketing and whatever, and their goal is to deliver perhaps leads or increase revenue or something, and it goes on and on. Now, what is important for an Agile organization, in order to be responsive, these goals need to be identified at each of these levels. And what happens is that the goals, and in fact, they have to be aligned. So the efficiency goals of the senior manager have to be something that supports the overall mission effectiveness or return on investment of the line of business executive. And the project managers have to deliver their projects in a way that supports the senior management's goal of efficiency and value delivery. And the staff members' goals of delivering their artifacts in a timely and efficient manner supports the project manager's goal of delivering the project in a timely and efficient manner. So what tends to happen is that the goals roll up. We get we apply the goal question metric technique at each level, but the analytics roll up. That is that a project manager's analytics depends on his staff's analytics, and then the senior manager's analytics depend on the project manager's analytics and the like. And if these things are set up and the organization is structured in a way that we'll talk about in the next webinar, in such a way, at each level, when changes are detected and they're reacted to by having the measures in place that help them detect the measures, have them detect the changes, and they're reacting to it in order to achieve the goals, the whole organization, in sort of a nice coupled system way, can react to the changes around it. What you people can't see, of course, is I'm waving my hands a bit as I talk. But this is exactly the key idea. And so when you're going to create an agile organization, you have to go through this idea of putting in place the sense and respond loops that are not only support the goals at each level, but be sure that the goals at each level support the goals above and below. And so the whole thing works as a nice integrated whole. Now again, the wrong kind of measures are we adhering to the process? Because that just means that you're going to reinforce stability in a way that doesn't allow for change. What we want to do is put in measures that help people respond to change. So, key idea, as I said, commitments flow down an organization. I make commitments. Since I've made commitments, then the people below me need to meet commitments, and the analytics flow up. Okay. So I'm going to stop here if there's any questions, and then we'll go on.
Well, it looks like right now we're still pretty clear, so I guess everything's well, so we'll go ahead and turn it back to you.
Okay. So what we're going to do now is talk about specific kinds of measures for each of these situations. Okay. So you recall that we had two kinds of that part of setting measures and part of setting your control sense and respond loops is to understand the nature of the work you're doing. That there's no one set of measures that really applies to all work, of course, and in fact, it's really key. It's part of being an agile organization is to be really aware of the nature of the work you're doing. So I think these two dimensions really work pretty well in sorting out the work. As you recall from last time, we talked about the ranges of uncertainty from small changes. Often you have a system design in place and you're adding new features to an existing system, or you're building a new system. As you go along this axis, you get more and more uncertain, and you have more and more needs for learning things. if you think about the product you're delivering, if you have a repeat, the product can be many of the same thing or things that are very of limited variation. And this is, of course, let me go back. This is, of course, the goal of a manufacturing line and the Six Sigma work where you're trying to minimize variation, or a process like stock trading where there shouldn't be a lot of variation. There's a few things you can do for most stock trades, at least commercial stock trades. There's a few options, and you hope they go on. When you're doing IT change requests, every IT change request is different. The amount of time and the amount of effort it's going to take for each one is different. So it's unlike a change request, unlike a stock trade. You can't guarantee in advance. You can't predict in advance how long each one will take. So setting a specific time goal for a stock trade makes sense. Setting a specific time goal for a IT change request doesn't make sense as much, but you can perhaps set some ranges. So this one of the first steps in looking at the amount of setting up your Agile management solution is getting a good sense of where your work fits in this scale. And what we notice is that the factory paradigm works really well for sort of this area here, and the project paradigm works really well for this area here. And what's interesting about much of software development is that both paradigms, particularly the Scrum method, sort of seem to fit where things overlap. And so you do talk about software factories, but that's only partially useful because most of the factory techniques really don't apply to software, and that's why I think it hasn't been either fully rejected or fully accepted as a good paradigm, because it is in this sort of overlapping area. Whereas something like building a whole new, brand new system, which would be up here, clearly isn't a factory thing at all. So, but there can be places where more factory modes apply to both. But the point is, whether you have a factory or whether you have a project is not so important as you understand the nature of the work you're doing and you're applying the metrics that apply for the kind of work you're doing. So again, there's two key goal sets. When you're in this area here, you really are worried about timeliness and productivity, and efficiencies, which I mean is cost per item and the time to complete the items. When you're up here, as I said, you're more often, the critical thing is getting the thing done on time, because you have a market window or a time. Its value depends on the time in which it's delivered. And the difficulties in dealing with this area here is a classical problem in Agile management, because the classical Agile techniques would have you say, well, we just don't know how long it's going to take. And the management would say, yes, but I need to know how long it's going to take. And we're going to talk about some techniques to sort of thread that needle and understand that you're not going to be able to tell me the actual time it takes, but we are going to be able to talk about the likelihood of meeting certain targets. So then we're going to have to get into probabilistic methods. Okay, so moving forward. So again, so there's the two key considerations for picking measures is the mixture of the work you're doing and the level of the organization you're at. So what I'm going to do now for the rest of the presentation is give you examples of measures for each of the two areas. And right now we're going to talk about the timeliness and productivity measure, is how to set appropriate measures that you can use for doing sense and respond loops there. And then I'll do the same thing for the projects quadrant. So for example, let's consider we're looking at level 3 support, which is like the change request support or the DevOps thing. and some issue has been identified, and you've been asked to improve your L3 performance by 10%. This is actually from a case study I did. So the developers, the management says, I want a 10% improvement in the L3 response. Actually, they said in the L3 performance. And the first question was, well, what does that even mean? And we decided that what they really wanted was 10% improvement in response time. And so what we did is we set up a high-level model of from the time the issue was identified to the time it's been released, and then we can look at intermediate time stamps for each of these stages. And for those of you who are familiar with value stream mapping is very powerful technique for looking at this sort of thing. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the next section. Then we started asking the question, going through the goal question metric idea. Well, okay, so we want to reduce the cycle time by 10%. What does that even mean? So we looked statistically at how long it actually took us to complete the ticket processing times. And what we got, we did a histogram. And for those who, most of you I'm sure know what histograms are, but what we did is we looked at the end-to-end time, this was in days, and we looked at the number of things that took that amount of time. So some things only took a few days because they were very simple, and that was most of them. And then a lot of things just took, there was this very long tail to this distribution. So if we had looked at the mean of this distribution, just the average time, it would have been here, but it didn't really capture very well the fact that we had this very long tail. And by the way, I'm willing to bet lunch with any of you that if you were to look at the time to complete of your tickets, the distribution will look much like this. We've done some theoretical reasoning looking at queuing theory to understand why this actually happens. And we've noticed this happens often. We found some SEV1 APARs, SEV1 defects that were 3 years old because the database was all messed up. But there are others that are there for other reasons. So we ended up with, and again, if you were to look at the histogram of the things you have. So what we did then is said, okay, the usual statistics of mean and standard deviation assume a centralized statistical distribution. We don't have that here. And in fact, if you were to look at -1 standard deviation from the mean, it would put you into negative time. It's all nonsense. So what we did instead was picked a more straightforward statistic, which is what was this, we divided this distribution into the head and the tail, which is we said, how long did it take for 80%, what was the 80th percentile? And because the things that are in the tail are often there for some reason that has to do with things that were never going to get worked on, or they're abandoned, or there was some mistake in the database, something that's abandoned. And the perception of the organization, if you're responsive, is if we can get 80% of the things that we give you done in less time, that would count. So we focused on the techniques of reduce. So what we decided the measurement was the 80th percentile of the histogram. Okay. And then we started looking at the cycle times of things when they were in backlog and things where they were in process to see where the time was actually spent. So we went from the time to ship, and then we looked at time in process and time in backlog. That is, there were two reasons why, in this simpler version, of why it would take longer to get things done. And one is that there wasn't enough people, things were just taking too long to even get addressed. And if we looked at the process of triage and actually getting into development, that could be the bottleneck, or the actual time that the ones that were being actually worked on, that could be the bottlenecks. And then finally, we went through a bunch of more detailed look, and we noticed that they were spending most of their time on Sev 3s, which were actually the least important, and we sort of recommended a better set of prioritization, and we also noticed that the amount of time that was being spent was mostly on a certain class of defects which required a different skill set than the team had. And so eventually we went through a bunch of insights and actions, and this is the key point here, that we were able to bring down the 80% point from 5 days to 60 days. So that's what improvement looks like for this kind of measure. Now, what the team continually has to do is monitor this 80% point. And if they see the 80% point is moving in the wrong direction, they immediately have to ask the question why and see what has changed in their environment and respond to it. So this isn't a one-time exercise. This is something that's continually monitored through these organizations. And what you'll find is that they will change, not stable things, because of the fact that the kinds of problems that will happen, there'll be a new thing inserted, there just are naturally peaks and valleys of work to be done. Often what you have to do is move people from one part of the pipeline to another to smooth this out. And organizations that can detect these changes and react to them and continually ask the question, why are they doing that, are not only acting in a lean manner, which is what the Reinertsen techniques would ask you to do and the value stream mapping techniques would suggest you do, but they're actually being agile. So I'm going to, if there's not a question here, I'll move on to looking at the situation for where the problem is uncertainty and not variations in flow.
Looks like we're still clear, Murray, so go ahead and proceed.
Great. Okay, so wonderful. So this is a simple example. In practice, though, just a few measures like this, and particularly internal backlog and internal processes built off of value stream maps, is very powerful here. So now we're going to look at the second problem, which is the likelihood of meeting the iron triangle goals. And this sort of takes you to a different place mathematically. So the key thing here is the time to complete. So if I were to ask you at the beginning of a project, when is it going to be done? And the answer is, I don't know. But through a variety of techniques, which I'm going to talk about, you can figure out what is the probability that it's going to be done within a certain amount of time. For example, whatever project most people start, we know that if people are allowed to work on it, we know it's probably going to, for certainly, it's going to be done in 10 years. And for certain, it won't get done next week. So we have so we know something. And the question is to narrow that estimate down to something that's useful. And that's we have a tool that does that, which I call BAP, for Bayesian Analytic Planner. And what this tool does is you set a target date, and it looks at the probability of coming in early and the probability of coming in late. And it shows you that probability distribution looks sort of like a normal distribution. It actually looks more like a Weibull distribution. And it is, and the red area is the amount of, is the percentage it's going to be late, and the green area is the percentage of, or the probability that it's going to be early. So how do you do this? How would you get this probability? Now, what you would do in an Agile project is you would track this not at the beginning, but you would track this week by week as work gets continued to see if you're steering towards an on-time delivery. And so, for example, if you have if you find that you're slipping to the right, you ask the question, why is that? What have we learned to make us slip to the right? Do we have to be managing the content? Do we need more labor? Do we need a different skill set? And again, you continually react to this measurement so you can steer the project as you go. And the whole point of this isn't to get the prediction right. It's to understand the probabilities as you're moving forward in order to be able to steer your project in an agile manner and react to your learning. So how would you do this? And the answer is you actually use a variant of planning poker. But the variant of planning poker is rather than ask for the one story point number, and by the way, you can either use the Fibonacci's or not, that's up to you. And you can do this at both the level of a story or at an epic. And so you go through a planning poker exercise, and you keep the high, you keep the low, and you settle on the consensus view, and you put in all three. So what you're essentially saying is there's no case that this story is less than this number of there's no probability it's smaller than the small number. There's no probability it's bigger than the big number. It's most likely equal to the expected number. And you also put in your velocities as ranges, which is, well, we expect on a weekly basis we're going to get about 240 story points. We expect no lower than 200 and no higher than 270. And then you put in the target weeks, and you get out these charts. And it tells you essentially two things. That it's this is the same chart I showed you before, which is the probability distribution. If I accumulate that, it tells me the confidence level. So if I were to go here, it says I'm 80% confident I'll come in on time. And it says as a good bet, 0, which is on time. It's actually at 50%, it's an even bet that I'll be 2 weeks early. And it's a poor bet. I would probably lose. It's only about 20% that I'll come in 5 weeks early. And what you do with these things is you do this with the amount of remaining work, with the amount of weeks left, and what you've learned about your velocity, and you track these as you go forward week by week to see if by the end of as you approach the target date, what your probabilities are. So you don't get into this green, 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 red phenomena where you discover late in the project that you had no chance of making it. Oops, sorry about that. So here, this is again another example. So the reason this is important, because when we're doing uncertain work, we're dealing with things, when we're doing novel work and it's uncertain, we have to embrace the uncertainty, work with it, and use techniques that apply that. So this is what we did here mathematically, is apply a Monte Carlo simulation to the estimates that were given from the planning poker. So here's another couple of examples. This is an example which is all red, which means it's a good bet. The best that's going to happen is and it's an even bet they're going to be 5 weeks late. If you didn't want to take good odds, they're probably going to be 8 weeks late, and it's a poor bet they're going to be as much as early as 3 weeks late. This is a project that's just not going to come in on time. Here's a project which is almost certainly going to be good on time, and it's a good bet that it's going to be 4 weeks early according to our estimates. So we can look at various examples. If you have a project like this, you have to do something really draconian to try to get the project back on schedule. If you have a project like this, you can feel pretty comfortable you're going to make the date. So there's a lot of advantages to this. I'm not going to go through all of this, but the whole key point is the bottom bullet. This takes what the workers know, what the programmers know. We take their input, We understand that they are uncertain, so we should be uncertain. We understand that when they do play panning poker, settling on one number isn't as good as having the team consensus that's within these ranges. We take the team's uncertainty and roll that up to a distribution that we can convey and consume and talk about with our management and with our upper levels of management so we can understand. We can also take these probabilities and roll them up to the likelihood of meeting revenue targets and the like. That's much more sophisticated. It avoids, as I said, the green, 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 red phenomena, and it's very important. But the key point here is that an agile organization has to not ignore its uncertainty, but embrace it, manage it, and react to it. And these are the kind of measures that do that.
Hey, Murray. Excuse me.
Yes.
I got a couple questions here. I thought maybe I could jump in and just ask those while we're writing it.
Yeah, we're doing real well.
Okay. First question is, let me take one of the easier ones. Says what was the BAP short for again? The BAP.
What was the what?
What's the acronym BAP short for again?
Bayesian Agile. The Bayesian Agile Planner.
The Bayesian Agile Planner. Got it. Okay.
Yes.
Next question. So how do you know if it says how do you know if they were working on the SEV3 issues because they were the easiest and could be addressed within the time frame of the sprints? And then it goes on to say, how do you get your sprint goals for unknown elements like defects to match deadlines? I can read that again if you need me to.
I'm not sure I understand the question. We knew they were doing the SEV3s because they were the easiest, but they weren't the most valuable.
Okay.
That was the whole point. And so the whole point was that maybe and it really brings up a really good point. I think it's a great question. So the point is, maybe the goal of timeliness was the wrong goal. Maybe the goal should be timeliness for each of the, maybe we should have had a better goal, which is timeliness for each of the severity classes.
Okay.
Right, and this is a great example. I really love the question because it's a great example of management getting the wrong perhaps reinforcing the wrong behavior.
All right.
With measures. Okay, so the whole point is so when you see that kind of phenomena, you ask the question: do you want just timeliness, or do you want timeliness per class? And of course, the obvious answer would be the latter, but you didn't even know to even ask that question until we looked at the data.
Okay. All right. Good.
What was the other question?
So I guess the second part of that says, how do you get your sprint goals for unknown elements like defects to match the deadlines?
Well, typically what you have for the two models that we have, that we typically don't. This is a complicated question. Often there aren't deadlines exactly for the first kind of change request kind of DevOps things. And if there's not, you're just trying to get statistically to the point that you're getting overall improvement. Now, if there are deadlines, then you have to start applying the kind of techniques we're looking at here, which is that we need to start looking at the problem, and how you do that is you use the planner that I'm talking about, and you start looking at the mix of things that can be achieved with high certainty within the deadlines. Okay, so if you have change requests, there's some amount of uncertainty in each of them, and you want to have a deadline for when you're going to commit to those sets of change requests. Then you use the Bayesian Agile Planner in which by the way runs very interactively in a scenario mode, and you say, okay, can I achieve with the team I have and the historical velocity ranges I know about? Can I make that? What is the certainty I can make that commitment even in the next, say, sprint? And we can do this at the sprint level. So, and the answer, and what you want to do is choose scenarios which you have about an 80% chance of making. If the person who asks the question sends me an email, I'll send them a white paper on how that's done.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, those are both very good questions. Thank you.
Okay. All right, well, let's go ahead and move on, though. You got those answered for us.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, I'm just in the process of rewriting the white paper, so that'll be perfect. Okay. And this is just a little bit of propaganda that this does align with the Agile Manifesto, but the key point here is that this is a way to have the right kind of communication about the uncertainty and actually instrument it in a way that management can work with. So I want to step way back up to a big point. We're going to talk next time about the organizational structures that one puts in place to enable this kind of technology. And remember that Agile organizations do not rely on command and control. They rely on empowering workers for carrying out the tasks and meeting their goals in such a way that supports the overall organization. Part of these measures is not to impose command and control on the organization, but to provide them the measurements that and goals that they need to address in order to provide value to the enterprise. So we give them essentially the tools they need to fulfill their role in the enterprise, because they do have a role, and presumably it's one that needs to be filled and they want to fill. So in particular, if you measure process adherence, and this is one of my sort of arguments with a lot of the key practice stuff, which is you define a process and measure how well people are adhering to it, you're impeding agility. But if you put in places measures of delivering value and efficiency and the like, that the organization knows if they deliver to these goals and measures and can react to them and they're given the power to react to what they do and make the changes they need to make, then you can have agility. And that's sort of the key measure here. And next time we'll talk about organizational structure that aligns with these kind of techniques. So any other questions?
Well, I think we're still good right now, Murray.
Okay, wonderful. I didn't think I was going to get this done in time, but I did. I apologize. It was pretty fast, but I hope, and you understand there's a lot of detail and whatever that's not covered, but I wanted to give folks a feeling for what this really was. So thank you very much. I look forward to, as I said, in the next one, we're going to wrap this up with organizational structure and sort of try to bring the whole picture together.
All right, great. Well, we certainly appreciate your the second segment here, Murray. And so as we wrap it up, I just want to remind everybody that the third part of Murray's Agile Management series will be talking about the solutions part. That will be on April 13th in the same time slot. You should receive an email reminder about that upcoming presentation, and so feel free to you can go out now to the QA USA website and register for that presentation, so you're reminded the day out before then. So go and get that done now. Also, this particular presentation is being recorded as well as the first part in the series. They'll both be located on the QAIUSA.com website under the webinars tab. So you can go out there. It takes us about a day to get this thing out there, so give us a little bit of time before this particular one's out there. I'm also going to remind you that next week, Bern Haber's presentation on metrics that matter sort of dovetails with this. We'd certainly love to have you there. You can go out to the QAIQuest.org/2016 website and go to the resources tab. You can also register for that free webinar as well. Certainly, it's been my pleasure to host Dr. Cantor and you folks today. And remember, part 3, building the Agile Management Solution, is next month. And thank you for joining us, and everybody have a great day.